while studying Brazilian cities, which as many, perhaps most cities in the global south are divided cities. And the problem is how movement, or dislocation of mind and body in space, shapes thinking and self-understanding for individuals and communities, and how this in turn is defined by the kinds of cities in which they live. And in the context of this conference, we might also want to think how this can define what a good city is, or how this defines the city in turn. So we approached this problem by focusing on porosity of city borders. That's what our ESSC project is about, at the level of the city. So you can see here, in one of the communities we study in Rio, how the problem of dislocation in space can take place. Into this problem we integrate the subjective level of individuals and communities. This is another view from Santa Marta, another of the communities we study in Rio, where you can see the kinds of borders that are involved in the dislocations people face every day when they move around the city. So the research map we have been developing looks a bit like this. We look at the city scale, considering porosity of borders, and I'll say something about that in a moment, which can be high, medium, or low, in relation to both individual resilience and community resilience, which we operationalize and consider through the perceptions and imaginations that people have about their city and neighborhoods, the wider social representations and knowledge that cities hold about themselves, and the specific areas of a town, and the manner in which place interacts with cognitive and affective understandings of self and others, as well as the life one should or could live. And that's especially important for young people living in favela territories, where life trajectories, potential selves, and development pathways are usually defined from without by the very adverse contextual situation in which they find themselves. We also investigate the role of agency at a collective level, how these communities produce a form of social experience that can appear as NGOs, social movements, artistic organizations in very hybrid, multiple forms that are very, very focused on acting on urban frontiers, trying to establish communication between favela territories and the wider public sphere of the city. And I can't talk about, I don't have the time to talk about this, but they are incredibly creative and innovative in the way they do that. So we look at these different levels in relation to what we call porosity of city borders, how open or closed neighborhoods are in relation to the wider sphere of the city. So a central, this is something that you can see. I want to make this very concrete. These dimensions are very easily identified in some of the urban voices that we have worked with in Rio, such as the ones from these young people from City of God and Cantagalo favelas in Rio. So, for instance, a very young man in Cantagalo says, here what happens is this, not in the hill, but in the asphalt, which is the way the division between the favela and the city is spoken about in Rio. They talk about the favela as the hill and the asphalt as the city. They look at you, oh, you are off the hill. Without shame, they hide their backs. They pretend that they are talking to someone behind you. hi there, they say, just to cross the street without any shame. They run away with fear. A young girl I interviewed in City of God, Cidade de Deus, said to me something that was very striking right at the beginning of this research. I don't go out of City of God to Barra, to Recreio, but I think that if I did, I would have had a lot of discrimination for being black. It would end up happening. Has this ever happened? No. And you fear that this would happen? She says, no, not fear, but shame. Why? Why do you think this happened? Because of me being black, being poor. So a central question to us is to ask, how can this girl, this beautiful, absolutely beautiful girl, how can she escape from her situation? As she grows up, she can forge a route. Can she forge a route to escape the damage to her sense of herself and her relation to others into the wider city? Increasing porosity of city borders is a possible answer to this question, which immediately makes the study of porous or open cities relevant. So in my paper today, I want to argue that porosity of city borders should be a central value and a central aim for building a good city. Open cities are enablers of communication between people, experiences, ideas across neighborhoods and geographies. Porous cities enable communication in multiple ways. One that, and especially, I think one of the things we discovered working in Rio is that the more open neighborhoods and territories are, the more the city is able to imagine its internal differences as something that is more than a threat, as something that actually can produce very positive sociability that can take us back to what was yesterday referred as the pleasure principle, to rediscover the city as a space of pleasure, as a space of positive sociability, as a space for discovering, for crossings and exchanges. So I will start by saying something about porosity of borders and about the indicators we consider that are relevant for diagnosing them, and very briefly I will indicate how this affects psychological dimensions of human development, both individual and social. So how to define porosity of borders? You know, part of the project was conduct a systematic review of this literature, and the key finding is that there is virtually nothing written about porosity of city borders. We couldn't find anything, but we found a great deal of research on the issue of borders and boundaries, and that's our conceptual starting point. Boundaries and borders in cities, they can be material, they can be ethnic, they can be religious, moral, they can be class-based, they can be institutional borders, they can be symbolic. And we found this research operating slightly independent, so people would consider these borders in their own right. So for the purposes of what we're doing, we conflated them in three dimensions that we consider, that we call physical and spatial borders, symbolic borders, and socio-institutional borders. And from those three dimensions, we try to find, this is a bit a description of what they are, but I'm going to move on from that. Perhaps I should say something about the symbolic elements of borders, because they are especially relevant for the psychosocial approach that we try to contribute here to the urban transformations discussions. When we speak about symbolic elements, we're talking about knowledge-based conceptual distinctions made by social actors to categorize objects, peoples, practices, and even time and space. They are able to separate people into groups and generate feelings of similarity and group membership. And they are incredibly important when it comes to understand the kinds of local knowledges and understandings that define how people navigate space in the city. But from these three dimensions, we have built some indicators that then we are able to study empirically in neighborhoods. This has to do with institutions, their number, their type, and diversity. So just to give you an idea, in the favelas, the institutional framework is characterized by a really strong complexity, despite there being very, very few institutions in favela life. The ones we found were the narco gangs. Narco traffic actually regulates and organizes favela life more than any other institution. The family is an important institution. The churches and these NGOs I was talking about, this organized social movements that sometimes are the only face of some kind of positive intervention favela territories use. So we look at institutions, who they are, how many are there, how diverse they are. We look at location in the city in terms of, is it remote, is it easy or difficult to gain access to, which directly operationalize the right to go, the right to come and go in the city. We look at urban connectors, lifts, parks, centers. In Rio, it has been incredibly important that the Complexo do Alemão favela, for instance, has been connected to the wider city via funicular that has completely transformed the way people in Complexo do Alemão move around the town. We look at the social representations, the tacit knowledges, the understandings people have about specific parts of town and about themselves, and whether there's a positive or negative. And we look at about how people have pleasure in the city, how people enjoy themselves if they do that inside their communities or outside their communities. So these are the kinds of indicators, and we have to use this model to compare different cities in Brazil: Fortaleza, Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, Porto Alegre. My students have used this model to look at London, to look at Caracas, to look at different towns as well. And to give you an idea of what we found in Rio, for instance, I just want to emphasize Cantagalo and Vigário Geral because they are they are at the extremes of this continuum. In Cantagalo, you find a let me start with Vigário Geral actually at the end, okay, which is at the end of the spectrum, very, very close borders, which are in contrast. In Cantagalo, you basically need to request permission. In Vigário Geral, you need to request permission to go in. The drug trade authorizes your entrance into that territory. You can see here that that's how you get into Cantagalo, through that bridge, and that's the researchers were walking there. There is someone actually at the border. As you can see, they use guns very explicitly to control the territorial border. And the institutions in Vigário are extremely limited. Apart from those NGOs that work there and local churches, the state is only present through the police and nowadays the army. There is no other presence of the state. There is no other institution. Moreover, there are incredibly negative representations of Vigário Geral in the city. People think of it as a Rio de Janeiro Gaza Strip. So it's something that prevents mobility, prevents people going in and going out. At the same time, and interestingly enough, you find this cultural center inside Vigário Geral, and this cultural center was constructed by Afro-Regi, which is one of the NGOs that operates there. It's a state-of-the-art cultural center. For those of you who know Brazilian music, Caetano Veloso, Chico Buarque have played in the cultural center. Madonna has played in the cultural center. So this is one of the ways in which new social agents have to bring the city into the community. And the name of this cultural center is quite mind-blowing because it's called Cultural Center Vali Salomão, who is one of the big names of Brazilian Tropicalia and is a hero for many of the favela activists who theorize the problem of hybridity in Brazilian culture, of mixture, of communication across different and across racial backgrounds. So they really make a very huge statement, as you can see here at the center, seen from the, I find this a very striking urban image in a way, to have that fist in the middle of a very remote favela in Rio. Now, Cantagalo is very, very different at the other end of this continuum, because you are going to see this is a self-portrait of Cantagalo favela that hangs right at the entrance of the community. They are very, very different because they are right in the middle of the city. You just need to go down or take the lift to be in Copacabana or to be in Ipanema. They enjoy all the facilities of the surroundings, and they can really communicate with the city in very different ways. So this is to exemplify to you what we're calling porosity of city borders and how we're trying to measure them. Now, we have linked this level of our research with the subjective psychological level and with indicators of human development. So what is striking for us is that we found a very clear association between movement and dislocations in the city and the expansion of self-esteem, the expansion of cognitive abilities in children and teenagers, the expansion of relational networks, the kinds of people and horizons young children and teenagers engage with. And we found that the more these communities rely on the NGOs that they themselves construct, the more close, the more they do not have access to what the state should be providing. So the role of these agencies, these NGOs operating in these territories is incredibly important and needs to be paid attention to, because they are the only face of some kind of agency that can connect to the state, that can be scaled, that the state can learn from, and have their projects scaled up. So, that's basically what I wanted to say. I have a very small film that is 2 minutes. I don't know if I can show that, because I think it's the best way to describe what people have to say about the favelas and what I was telling you. Yeah. So if you allow me,
at the cost of some questions in the end.
Yeah, that's fine. Oops, sorry, I need to find it. It's here.